Good evening, weary traveller of the modern world. As the glow of your screen dims and the familiar comfort of your climate-controlled sanctuary fades away, I invite you to close your eyes and let your consciousness drift backward through the endless corridors of time, past the rise and fall of empires, past the birth of Christ, past the golden age of Greece, past the towering pyramids of Egypt, back to the very cradle of human civilization itself. You are floating now through the millennia, through the dust of ages, until you land with a bone-jarring thud on sun-baked clay in the year those mille BC. Welcome to Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the place where humanity first decided that living in cities and writing things down might be a good idea. Congratulations, you've just awakened in what historians cheerfully call the cradle of civilization. Unfortunately, cradles can also be graves, and you're about to discover why this particular birthplace of human progress would gladly strangle you in your sleep if the dysentery doesn't get you first, before the merciless Mesopotamian sun turns your exposed skin into jerky and you accidentally commit 17 different crimes against gods you've never heard of. Pause for a moment and let us know where in the world you're watching from, and what ungodly hour it is in your time zone. Are you a fellow insomniac seeking solace in ancient suffering? A student procrastinating on actual history homework? Drop a comment and join our growing community of people who find comfort in learning about how much worse life used to be. This channel runs on curiosity, caffeine, and the collective acknowledgement that every previous generation of humans had an absolutely terrible chapter. 1. Your glorious awakening. You open your eyes to a world painted in shades of brown, beige, and more brown. The sky above you is a merciless blue dome, already beginning to shimmer with heat waves, despite the fact that the sun has barely begun its daily campaign of atmospheric warfare against your soon-to-be-leather skin. You're lying on what appears to be a mixture of clay, sand, and what you desperately hope is just mud, but probably, as in single quotes, your mouth tastes like you've been gargling with sand, which, coincidentally, you probably have been, because sand is basically the fifth element here in Mesopotamia, along with clay, heat, desperation, and divine wrath. Every breath you take carries microscopic particles of the Fertile Crescent directly into your lungs, where they will set up permanent residence and remind you of this moment for however long you manage to survive, which, let's be honest, won't be very long. You sit up slowly and immediately discover several things about your new situation. First, you're wearing what can charitably be called clothing, a rough woven tunic that feels like it was made from hair that fell off a particularly disagreeable goat. Second, your feet are bare, which in Mesopotamia is roughly equivalent to volunteering for tetanus. Third, you're thirsty with the kind of bone-deep thirst that makes you understand why desert mirages exist. Your body is literally trying to hallucinate water into existence. Fourth, and most importantly, you can hear the sounds of a city waking up around you, the creak of wooden wheels on rough stone streets, the bellow of oxen being convinced to perform another day of back-breaking labor, the chatter of voices speaking in a language that sounds like someone gargling gravel while simultaneously having an argument with the concept of vowels. You've awakened in one of humanity's first cities, and already you can sense that this place operates by rules you don't understand, enforced by gods you've never heard of, in service of people who consider you roughly as important as the dirt under their fingernails. Which, given that you're currently sitting in that same dirt, seems about right. Chapter 2. The climate wants you dead. Let's talk about the weather. Because in Mesopotamia, weather isn't small talk, it's a matter of life and death. You've awakened in a region where the climate can best be described as aggressively hostile to human life. The summers here reach temperatures that would make modern air conditioning units weep and give up. We're talking about heat that doesn't just make you sweat, it makes you question the wisdom of existing in physical form. The sun here isn't just bright, it's personally offended by your presence. Within an hour of full daylight, the temperature will climb to levels that turn clay into pottery and pottery into regret. You'll discover muscles you never knew you had as they all simultaneously cramp. From dehydration, your skin will begin the fascinating process of transforming from its current human texture into something resembling a well-worn leather. Scroll, but here's the truly delightful part. It's not just hot. The air is so dry that moisture evaporates from your body faster than you can produce it. Every breath you take is like inhaling the essence of a pottery kiln. Your lips will crack within hours. Your nose will feel like someone filled it with sand and disappointment. Your throat will develop a scratchy quality that makes you sound like you've been gargling with crushed pottery, which, again, you basically have been. And when the heat finally breaks, when the sun mercifully decides to call it a day, that's when you discover that Mesopotamian nights can be surprisingly cold, not refreshingly cool. We're talking about temperature drops that will have you shivering in your goat hair tunic, while still somehow managing to be thirsty. It's like Mother Nature looked at this region and said, you know what? Let's make it impossible to be comfortable at any time, ever. But wait, there's more. Because you're not just dealing with temperature extremes. You're dealing with dust storms that can literally reshape the landscape overnight. Imagine waking up to discover that the road you walked down yesterday no longer exists because a wall of wind and sand decided to redecorate the entire region. These storms don't just bring dust, they bring a complete sensory apocalypse. The air becomes unbreathable. The sun disappears behind a wall of airborne dirt. Everything you own becomes coated in a fine layer of grit that will work its way into places on your body you didn't know existed. Chapter 3. The water situation. Spoiler, it's terrible. Now, you might be thinking, well, at least I'm in the land between two rivers. Surely water won't be a problem. Oh sweet, naive time traveler. Let me introduce you to the wonderful world of ancient water management, where every drop you drink is playing Russian roulette with your digestive system. Yes, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are here, flowing with all the majesty and grandeur that inspired poets and engineers for millennia. They're also flowing with every parasite, bacterium, and waterborne disease known to ancient medicine, which is to say, none of them are known to ancient medicine, because ancient medicine consists primarily of praying really hard and hoping. The gods are in a good mood. The water you'll be drinking, assuming you can get access to any, comes with a complementary ecosystem of microscopic horrors that view your intestinal tract as prime real estate. Dysentery isn't just a possibility. Here, it's practically a rite of passage. Within days of arrival, you'll become intimately familiar with the ancient Mesopotamian approach to public sanitation, which can be summarized as anywhere but inside the house, and even that's negotiable. But let's say you're clever. Let's say you think, I'll just drink beer instead of water. Beer is safer because it's been boiled. Congratulations, you've discovered one of humanity's greatest innovations, the realization that slightly alcoholic beverages are less likely to kill you than straight water. The Mesopotamians figured this out thousands of years ago, which is why even children drank beer with breakfast. Unfortunately, ancient Mesopotamian beer bears about as much resemblance to modern beer as a mud brick bears to a skyscraper. This isn't crisp, refreshing lager. This is thick, chunky, barely filtered grain water that you'll need to drink through a straw just to avoid chewing your beverage. It tastes like someone liquefied bread, let it sit in the sun for a week, and then added just enough alcohol to make you question your life choices. And the water situation gets worse when you realize that every drop you consume has to be carried manually by human beings in clay pots from sources that may or may not currently exist depending on the whims of the river gods. Water is heavy, clay pots are fragile, human beings are unreliable. This is not a supply chain built for convenience. Chapter 4. Welcome to the bottom of the social pyramid. Let's address your position in this grand civilization. You are not a king. You are not a priest. You are not even a skilled craftsman or a merchant. You have awakened as what historians politely term common folk, which in ancient Mesopotamia translates roughly to human furniture that occasionally needs to be fed. The social hierarchy here is less of a ladder and more of a cliff face, and you're clinging to the bottom with your fingernails. At the top, basking in the glory of divine mandate and unlimited power, sit the kings and rulers. Below them, the priests who speak directly to the gods and somehow always manage to interpret the divine will in ways that benefit the priests. Below them, the merchants and skilled craftsmen who at least own things and have some say in their daily lives. And then there's you. You own nothing, you control nothing. Your opinions matter to absolutely no one, including yourself, because having opinions is a luxury you literally cannot afford. Your primary function in this society is to perform labor that more important people don't want to do, in exchange for just enough food and shelter to keep you alive enough to perform more labor tomorrow. Your day begins before dawn, not because you're an early riser, but because the alternative to working is starving, and starvation, while certainly a valid career choice in ancient Mesopotamia, is generally considered a short-term profession. You'll spend your daylight hours performing back-breaking agricultural labor, construction work, or whatever other tasks need doing by people whose names the gods actually remember. The beautiful thing about being at the bottom of the social hierarchy is that everyone above you has not just the right, but the divine obligation to tell you what to do. The king can conscript you for military service or public works projects. The priests can demand your labor for temple construction. Local officials can requisition your time for civic projects. Even other commoners who happen to own a slightly better goat than you can leverage that advantage into a position of relative authority. You have no legal protections worth mentioning, no political voice, and no realistic prospects for advancement. Social mobility in ancient Mesopotamia exists primarily in the downward direction. You can always become a slave. Chapter 5. Hammurabi's Code, or How to Accidentally Become a Criminal. Speaking of legal protections, let's discuss the famous Code of Hammurabi, one of humanity's first written legal systems. Modern people often praise it as an early example of justice and the rule of law. What they don't mention is that if you're poor, which you are, this legal code is basically an instruction manual for how society is allowed to destroy you. The Code of Hammurabi operates on the principle of an eye for an eye, which sounds fair until you realize that the value of your eye is significantly less than the value of a wealthy person's eye. If you, a commoner, injure a noble, you'll be executed or mutilated. If a noble injures you, they'll pay a fine. The system isn't blind justice, It's justice with very keen eyesight for social status. Let's run through some scenarios. You're working construction on a house, and part of it collapses and kills someone. Under Hammurabi's code, the builder, that's you, can be executed. Not the person who designed it. Not the person who provided substandard materials. Not the official who approved the construction. You, the person holding the tools when everything went wrong. Or, let's say you're falsely accused of a crime. Under this advanced legal system, you'll be thrown into the river. If you drown, you were obviously guilty. If you survive, you were innocent, and whoever accused you will face the penalty they wanted you to receive. This is what passes for forensic science in 2000 BCE to trial by drowning. But here's the real beauty of ancient Mesopotamian law. You can commit crimes without knowing they exist. Religious infractions, social violations, economic improprieties. There are hundreds of ways to break laws you've never heard of, enforced by officials who have every incentive to find you guilty of something. Did you sell grain without proper measurement? That's a crime punishable by drowning. Did you buy something without witnesses? Criminal fraud. Did you speak disrespectfully about a local official? Sedition. Did you fail to report a crime you witnessed? Accessory to the original crime. Did you report a crime that couldn't be proven? False testimony, punishable by death. The legal system isn't designed to protect you. It's designed to protect everyone who matters from you. Chapter 6. The gods are watching, and they're not happy. Religion in ancient Mesopotamia isn't a Sunday morning obligation or a personal spiritual journey. It's a full-time job with performance reviews conducted by deities who have very specific ideas about proper human behavior and absolutely no patience for mistakes. You live in a world populated by hundreds of gods, each with their own personality, preferences, and pet peeves. There's Marduk, the king of the gods, who expects regular tribute and respect. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, who can bless your crops or curse your family depending on her mood. Enlil, the god of wind and storms, who can literally blow your house down if he's having a bad day. And dozens of others, each requiring different rituals, different offerings, and different types of worship. The problem is that these gods don't communicate their expectations clearly. Divine will is interpreted through omens, dreams, the flight patterns of birds, the shapes of clouds, and the condition of sacrificed animal organs. Professional priests spend their entire lives learning to read these signs, and even they get it wrong most of the time. But you're expected to navigate this religious minefield with no training, no guidance, and no margin for error. Did you face the wrong direction while praying? Blasphemy. Did you forget to leave an offering at the neighborhood shrine? Neglect of religious duty. Did you work on a day that turned out to be religiously significant? Violation of sacred law and the offerings, oh, the offerings. In a world where you barely have enough food to keep yourself alive, you're expected to regularly give away portions of your meager resources to appease gods who, frankly, seem to have very expensive tastes. Bread, beer, meat, oil, textiles, everything you need to survive, is also something the gods demand as tribute. The terrifying part is that divine displeasure doesn't just affect you. It affects your entire community. If the harvest fails, if floods destroy the city, if enemies attack, if disease spreads, someone obviously offended the gods. And since the king and the priests are obviously blameless, they speak to the gods directly. After all, the fault must lie with the common people, with people like you. Religious festivals aren't celebrations, their desperate attempts at community damage control. Everyone gathers to collectively grovel before the gods, hoping that sufficient displays of devotion might prevent whatever catastrophe is surely coming next. Chapter 7. Employment opportunities. All of them terrible. Let's discuss your career prospects in ancient Mesopotamia, keeping in mind that career is a modern concept and prospects is an optimistic term. If you're lucky enough to find work, and finding work is literally a matter of life and death, you'll discover that ancient job descriptions can be summarized as back-breaking labor until you die. The economy runs on human power, animal power, and the occasional application of leverage through simple machines that haven't been invented yet. Agriculture is the most common employment, which means you'll spend your days bent over in fields, under the blazing sun, planting, weeding, watering, and harvesting crops by hand. Your tools consist of wooden implements that break regularly and stone blades that need constant sharpening. Your co-workers are oxen, who are better fed than you are and have more job security. The irrigation system that makes agriculture possible in this desert requires constant maintenance, which means you'll also spend time digging channels, clearing blockages, and reinforcing earthwork barriers against floods. This is skilled labor in the sense that doing it wrong can flood or drought entire regions. But it's paid like unskilled labor because you're easily replaceable. Construction work is another option, assuming you enjoy moving massive stone blocks and clay bricks in 100-degree heat. The pyramids get all the press, but Mesopotamians were building ziggurat-stepped pyramid temples that required just as much manual labor and engineering skill. The difference is that Egyptian pyramid builders were relatively well compensated. Skilled workers, Mesopotamian construction workers, were whoever was available and strong enough to lift things. If you're particularly unlucky, you might find yourself conscripted for military service. Ancient warfare is nothing like the romanticized versions you've seen in movies. It's standing in formation with inadequate armor, holding weapons you barely know how to use, facing enemies who want to kill you for reasons you don't understand, in service of rulers who consider you expendable. The best-case scenario for military service is that you survive long enough to return home with enough battle experience to qualify for slightly better jobs as a guard or watchman. The worst-case scenario is death, dismemberment, or capture, which leads to slavery, a career path we'll discuss shortly. Chapter 8. What passes for food? You're hungry. You've been hungry since you woke up, and you're going to stay hungry for the foreseeable future, because ancient Mesopotamian cuisine can best be described as whatever doesn't kill you immediately. Your basic diet consists of barley, barley bread, barley porridge, barley soup, and occasionally, as a special treat, barley that's been allowed to ferment into something resembling beer. Barley is hardy, grows in poor soil, and stores well, which makes it the perfect crop for a civilization that's always one bad harvest. Away from starvation when barley isn't available, which is often, you'll supplement your diet with whatever can be foraged, hunted, or scavenged. Wild plants, some of which are nutritious, some of which are poisonous, and most of which taste like they're trying to punish you for eating them. Small animals that you can catch with primitive traps, fish from irrigation channels that have been swimming in water you wouldn't use to wash your feet. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions, religious festivals, and people who matter more than you do. When you do get meat, it's usually the parts that wealthier people don't want. Organs, bones, with scraps of flesh, cuts that require hours of cooking to become chewable. Dairy products exist, but refrigeration doesn't, which means milk becomes cheese very quickly whether you want it to or not. Ancient cheese is less of a food and more of a survival strategy. It's protein that won't rot immediately in the heat. It tastes like it sounds. Fruits and vegetables are seasonal and expensive. When they're available, you'll eat them immediately because storing fresh produce without refrigeration is basically impossible. The rest of the year, you'll dream about the brief periods when your diet included something that grew above ground and wasn't made from grain. Salt is precious, both as a preservative and as flavoring. Most of your food will be essentially unseasoned, which is probably for the best because seasoning might trick you into eating more of it. Meals aren't social occasions, they're refueling stops. You eat quickly, efficiently, and gratefully, because you never know when the next meal is coming. Chapter 9: Personal Hygiene. In the cradle of civilization, let's address what might charitably be called your personal grooming situation. In a world without running water, soap, or any real understanding of germs, staying clean is less of a daily routine and more of an impossible dream. You'll bathe when you can, which isn't often. Water for washing has to be carried manually from sources that may be miles away, heated over fires that require fuel you can't afford, and used sparingly because every drop is precious. Most of your bathing will consist of wiping yourself down with cloths, sand, or whatever rough materials are available. Your hair will become intimately acquainted with dust, sweat, and various oils produced by your scalp's desperate attempts to protect itself from the environment. Hair washing is an occasional luxury, usually involving harsh soaps, made from animal fats and wood ash, that leave your scalp feeling like you've shampooed with sandpaper. Dental hygiene consists of chewing on twigs and hoping for the best. Your teeth will accumulate layers of plaque, food particles, and general mouth debris that will make your breath a weapon of social destruction. Tooth pain is a constant companion for anyone over the age of 20, and tooth loss is so common it's barely worth mentioning. Your clothing will absorb sweat, dirt, and odors until it reaches a state of equilibrium with the local environment. Laundry involves beating fabric against rocks with soap that's more like concentrated lye. The process is so harsh that clothes literally wear out from being cleaned. And then there are the parasites. Lice will set up permanent residence in your hair and clothing. Fleas will treat your body like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Various worms and intestinal passengers will move in and make themselves comfortable. You'll develop an intimate relationship with creatures you can't see but can definitely feel. Personal grooming tools are basic and dangerous. Knives for trimming hair and nails, rough stones for scraping away dead skin, sharp instruments for dealing with splinters and thorns. Every grooming session carries the risk of infection, cuts, and accidental self. Chapter 10: Disease, Death, and the Absence of Medical Care. Ancient Mesopotamian medicine operates on the cutting-edge theory that illness is caused by demons, divine displeasure, or moral failings. Treatment involves prayer, ritual purification, and herbs that may or may not actually do anything beyond making you feel like you're actively fighting the disease. Your life expectancy is roughly equivalent to what modern people consider early middle age, not because people can't live longer, but because the accumulated effects of malnutrition, disease, injury, and environmental hazards catch up with everyone eventually. Childhood diseases that modern medicine treats with simple antibiotics will kill children regularly. Adults die from infections that start with minor cuts. Broken bones that don't heal properly result in permanent disability. Diseases spread through communities like wildfire because no one understands contagion or how to prevent it. The medical professionals available are priest-physicians who treat illness as a spiritual problem, requiring spiritual solutions. They'll examine your symptoms, consult omens, and prescribe rituals designed to appease whatever god or demon is causing your suffering. Sometimes this works, usually because the human body is remarkably good at healing itself if given time and rest. When prayer and ritual fail, medicine turns to herbs and natural remedies. Some of these are genuinely effective: willow bark for pain, honey for wound treatment, certain plants for digestive issues. Others are based on the principle that if something tastes terrible enough, it must be powerful medicine. Surgery exists, but it's primitive and usually performed without anesthesia or proper sterilization. The good news is that if you survive the surgery, you're probably tough enough to survive almost anything. The bad news is that most people don't survive the surgery. Childbirth is particularly dangerous. Infant mortality rates are staggering, and maternal mortality during delivery is common enough that pregnancy is viewed as a 9-month flotation with death. Mental illness is understood as demonic possession or divine punishment, treated with exorcism rituals and social isolation. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions are moral failings rather than medical conditions. Chapter 11. Natural disasters and divine displeasure. The natural world in Mesopotamia operates like a vindictive god, with mood swings and unlimited power to make your life miserable. Floods, droughts, earthquakes, and storms aren't just weather, they're divine commentary on human behavior. And the commentary is usually negative. The rivers that make civilization possible also make it precarious. Floods can wipe out entire cities with little warning. Not gentle spring flooding that waters the crops, but raging torrents that destroy everything humans have built and reshape the landscape overnight. Your home, your fields, your entire community can disappear under muddy water, leaving survivors to start over with nothing. But floods are almost preferable to droughts, which kill slowly and thoroughly. When the rivers run low, irrigation systems fail, crops die, and famine spreads across the region. People abandon their homes to search for water and food. Communities collapse as neighbors compete for resources. Social order breaks down when everyone is slowly starving. Earthquakes strike without warning, collapsing buildings that weren't designed to withstand seismic activity. The architecture of ancient Mesopotamia, mud brick and stone construction, becomes deadly rubble when the ground shakes. Entire neighborhoods can be buried under the remains of their own homes. Dust storms transform day into night and make breathing a conscious effort. Sand gets into everything: your food, your water, your lungs, your eyes. These storms can last for days, making travel impossible and outdoor work deadly. Locusts descend in clouds that darken the sky, devouring every green plant for miles. Crops that survived drought, flood, and human incompetence are stripped bare by insects that arrive in biblical numbers and leave biblical devastation in their wake. Each disaster is interpreted as evidence that someone, somewhere, has offended the gods. The response is always the same: more prayers, more offerings, more ritual purification. Communities impoverish themselves, trying to appease divine anger, often making recovery from natural disasters even more difficult. Chapter 12. The institution of slavery. Let's discuss the career opportunity no one wants but many people receive: slavery. In ancient Mesopotamia, slavery isn't just a possibility. It's a constantly hovering threat that can materialize from debt, warfare, crime, or simple bad luck. Debt slavery is probably the most common path to bondage. Unable to repay loans, and in a subsistence economy, everyone eventually needs to borrow something. You can literally sell yourself or family members to creditors. This isn't metaphorical slavery. It's actual ownership of human beings as property. Military defeat leads to mass enslavement of captured populations. Entire cities can find their survivors marched off to serve their conquerors. Gender, age, and social status provide no protection. Everyone is potentially valuable as forced labor. Criminal penalties often involve slavery rather than imprisonment or fines. Can't pay the penalty for your crime? Congratulations, you're now property. The justice system is designed to convert criminal behavior into labor resources for people who matter. Even voluntary slavery exists as an economic strategy. Faced with starvation, some people sell themselves into bondage in exchange for food and shelter. It's a rational choice in an irrational world. Slavery offers security that freedom doesn't provide. As a slave, you discover that you're not quite human anymore in the legal sense. You're property that can be bought, sold, traded, inherited, or destroyed at your owner's discretion. Your labor, your children, your body, and your life belong to someone else. The work is whatever your owner needs done. Agricultural labor, domestic service, construction, manufacturing, or anything else that requires human hands and backs. The hours are unlimited. The conditions are whatever your owner considers adequate. Your opinion on working conditions is both unwelcome and irrelevant. Escape is theoretically possible, but practically suicidal. Runaway slaves face execution if caught, and surviving alone in the wilderness isn't realistic for most people. Where would you go? How would you eat? Who would help a fugitive slave? Chapter 13. How the other half lives. While you're scraping together subsistence and dodging various forms of death, it's worth understanding how the wealthy and powerful live in this same civilization. The contrast isn't just dramatic, it's obscene. Nobles and wealthy merchants live in houses built from fired brick rather than mud brick. Their homes have multiple rooms, courtyards, and even primitive plumbing systems. They eat meat regularly, drink wine imported from distant regions, and wear clothing made from fine textiles that cost more than you'll earn in a lifetime. Their medical care comes from the best physician priests available, supplemented by imported medicines and treatments. When they get sick, entire teams of specialists focus on their recovery. When you get sick, you pray and hope the gods are paying attention. Wealthy children receive education. They learn to read and write, study mathematics and astronomy, and train for positions of authority. Your children, if you have any and they survive childhood, will learn to perform the same back-breaking labor that defines your existence. The rich have legal protections that actually work. When they're accused of crimes, they can afford proper representation and have social connections that influence outcomes. Their testimony carries weight in legal proceedings. Their property rights are enforced by armed men who work for them. Religious obligations that impoverish common people are opportunities for the wealthy to display their piety and social status. They can afford elaborate offerings, sponsor temple construction, and hire priests to perform rituals on their behalf. Divine favor, it seems, has a price tag. Even their entertainment is different. While you collapse exhausted at the end of each day, they attend festivals, commission artwork, and enjoy leisure, activities that require disposable income and free time. The most infuriating part is that this Lacassian equality is presented as natural and divinely ordained. The gods favor the wealthy because the wealthy deserve divine favor. The poor suffer because they lack moral worth. Social hierarchy isn't just economic, it's cosmic justice. Chapter 14. Strange Customs and Bizarre Beliefs. Daily life in ancient Mesopotamia involves navigating customs and beliefs that would seem bizarre to modern people, but are matters of life and death in your current situation. Liver divination is serious business. Professional priests examine the organs of sacrificed animals to predict the future and interpret divine will. The shape, color, and condition of sheep livers determine everything from military strategy to marriage prospects. Your fate might be decided by the state of an organ from an animal you'll never see. Dream interpretation is another professional specialty. Dreams aren't just subconscious processing, they're direct communication from the gods. Professional dream interpreters can tell you whether your nightmares mean you're cursed, whether your good dreams indicate divine favor, and what specific actions you need to take based on what you saw while sleeping. Beer isn't just a beverage, it's currency, medicine, and religious offering all in one. Workers are paid in beer rations. Contracts are written on clay tablets that specify payment in specific amounts of beer. Religious ceremonies involve pouring beer on altars as offerings to gods, who apparently enjoy a good drink. Names have power beyond simple identification. Knowing someone's true name gives you magical influence over them. Important people have public names and secret names. Curses work by invoking specific names. Identity isn't just social, it's magical. Contracts and legal documents are written on clay tablets, but they're not just legal instruments, they're magical objects. The act of writing creates a spiritual bond between the parties. Breaking a written contract doesn't just violate social agreements, it offends the gods who witness the writing. Birth signs and omens determine everything about your life path. The day you were born, the weather conditions, the behavior of animals, and various other signs predict your personality, your career prospects, your marriage compatibility, and your likelihood of divine favor or punishment. Even hairstyles have religious and social significance. How you wear your hair indicates your social status, your profession, your marital status, and your relationship with various gods. Getting a haircut isn't just grooming, it's making a public statement about your identity. Chapter 15. The Economics of Survival. Let's examine the economic system that keeps you perpetually on the edge of starvation while supporting the magnificent civilization around you. The economy of ancient Mesopotamia operates on principles that would make modern economists weep with frustration. Most economic transactions happen through barter rather than money. You trade your labor for food, your surplus goods for tools, your services for other services. This works fine when everyone has something to trade, but becomes problematic when you have nothing to offer except your ability to lift heavy objects. Interest rates on loans are astronomical by modern standards, often 20 to 30% annually. But in a world where crop failures are common and economic stability is non-existent, lending money is genuinely risky. The problem is that borrowing money is often the only alternative to starvation, so people accept ruinous terms and hope to survive long enough to repay them. Taxes are collected in goods and labor rather than currency. You owe the state a portion of your harvest, a certain number of work days per year. and various fees for services like legal proceedings and religious ceremonies. Tax collection is enforced by armed men who have little patience for excuses about crop failures or personal hardship. Land ownership is complicated and often theoretical. You might have the right to farm a piece of land, but you don't own it in any modern sense. The state, the temple, or local nobles can reclaim land for public projects, religious purposes, or simple convenience. Your investment in improving farmland can disappear overnight through legal mechanisms you don't understand. Craft specialization exists, but it's limited by technology and market size. A skilled potter or metal worker can earn slightly better living conditions, but even skilled craftsmen are one economic downturn away from poverty. There's no middle class in any recognizable sense, just various levels of economic insecurity. Trade with distant regions brings exotic goods and new ideas, but also economic instability. When trade routes close due to warfare or political changes, local economies collapse. Communities that depend on imported materials or export markets can find themselves economically devastated by events happening hundreds of miles away. Chapter 16: Justice, Punishment, and Accidental Crimes. The legal system that governs your daily existence operates on principles that prioritize social order over individual rights, divine law over human needs, and punishment over rehabilitation. Courts are presided over by officials who are more concerned with maintaining social hierarchy than determining truth. Your social status affects every aspect of legal proceedings. Your testimony carries less weight than a noble's. Your punishments are more severe than a wealthy person's, and your ability to appeal decisions is essentially non-existent. Many crimes are strict liability offenses. Your intentions don't matter, only the outcome. If you're involved in an accident that harms someone, you're responsible regardless of whether you were negligent or simply unlucky. If you sell defective goods, you face punishment even if the defects weren't visible or intentional. Witnesses are required for most legal transactions, but finding reliable witnesses is expensive and complicated. People who can serve as witnesses are usually wealthy enough to have free time and social standing. Poor people like yourself often can't afford proper legal documentation, which means your business dealings are legally vulnerable. Oaths and curses play a central role in legal proceedings. Swearing by the gods isn't just a formality. It's invoking divine enforcement of human agreements. Breaking an oath doesn't just violate human law. It invites divine punishment that can affect your entire family and community. Physical evidence is limited by technology and investigative techniques. Most legal decisions are based on testimony, reputation, and social standing rather than material proof. This means that wealthy people with good reputations can literally get away with murder, while poor people can be convicted of crimes they didn't commit simply because their word carries no weight. Public punishment serves as both penalty and entertainment. Executions, mutilations, and public humiliations draw crowds and serve as warnings to potential criminals. Your suffering becomes a community spectacle designed to reinforce social order and divine authority. Appeals processes exist in theory, but are practically inaccessible to common people. Appealing a legal decision requires resources, connections, and knowledge of procedures that are kept deliberately obscure. By the time you figure out how to appeal, your punishment has usually already been carried out. Chapter 17: The Constant Threat of War. Peace in ancient Mesopotamia is a temporary condition between periods of warfare And warfare means that your already precarious existence can become actively deadly at any moment. City-states fight each other constantly over water rights, trade routes, territorial boundaries, and religious disputes. These aren't abstract political conflicts. They're existential struggles that determine whether your community survives or gets absorbed into someone else's empire. When armies approach, you have three options, all of them terrible. You can flee, abandoning everything you own and hoping to survive as a refugee in foreign territory. You can hide inside the city walls and hope the siege doesn't last longer than your food supplies. Or you can be conscripted into military service to defend your home with weapons you barely know how to use. Siege warfare is particularly brutal. Armies surround cities and wait for starvation, disease, and despair to do their work. Inside the walls, food becomes precious, water becomes rationed, and social order gradually collapses as people fight over increasingly scarce resources. Outside the walls, enemy soldiers rape, pillage, and destroy everything they can't carry away. If your city falls, the survivors face mass enslavement, execution, or deportation. Entire populations can be marched hundreds of miles to serve their conquerors in foreign lands. Families are separated, communities are destroyed, and cultural identity disappears under the weight of conquest. Even victory brings problems. Armies returning from successful campaigns bring foreign diseases, disrupted trade relationships, and inflated expectations for plunder that may not exist. War debt from military campaigns gets passed on to taxpayers like you through increased levies and forced labor requirements. Military service, whether voluntary or conscripted, means months or years away from home performing the most dangerous job in the ancient world. Ancient warfare is brutal hand-to-hand combat with primitive weapons and minimal armor. Medical care for wounded soldiers consists of battlefield surgery without anesthesia and hope that infection doesn't set in. The psychological trauma of warfare has no name and no treatment. Survivors return home with what we would recognize as post-traumatic stress, but ancient medicine interprets their symptoms as divine punishment or moral weakness. Communities expect veterans to readjust to civilian life immediately, without support or understanding. Chapter 18: Festivals, Rituals, and Mandatory Fun. Religious festivals aren't optional celebrations, they're community obligations that require your participation, your resources, and your complete attention to divine protocol. The calendar is packed with religious observances honoring different gods for different reasons. Harvest festivals, planting festivals, flood festivals, military festivals, and royal festivals follow each other in endless succession. Each requires specific types of preparation, participation, and offerings. Festival preparation means additional work on top of your regular survival activities. Temples need to be cleaned, decorations need to be made, special foods need to be prepared, and ritual objects need to be crafted. This work is considered religious duty, which means it's unpaid and mandatory. During festivals, normal economic activity stops, which means you lose income while still needing to contribute resources to the celebration. It's economically devastating on a personal level, but refusing to participate is religious and social suicide. Ritual requirements are precise and unforgiving. Wearing the wrong colors, facing the wrong direction, speaking at the wrong time, or failing to perform prescribed actions can invalidate entire ceremonies and require expensive do-overs. Professional priests spend years learning proper ritual procedures. But common people are expected to participate correctly without formal training. Sacred drama and religious theatre require community members to play roles in mythological stories. You might find yourself portraying demons, heroes, or gods in elaborate productions that recreate creation myths or historical events. These aren't artistic opportunities, they're religious obligations that carry spiritual significance and social pressure. Feast days sound appealing until you realize that the feasting is done primarily by people who can afford to feast regularly. Common people contribute food resources to community celebrations, but consume very little of the resulting banquet. You'll watch wealthy families eat elaborately while you survive on the same subsistence diet as always. Religious dancing, singing, and musical performance are community requirements during festivals. Everyone is expected to participate with enthusiasm and skill. If you can't sing, dance, or play instruments well, you'll still be required to try, and your inadequate performance becomes part of your social reputation. Chapter 19: Technology, Tools, and the Limits of Innovation. The technological level of ancient Mesopotamia represents humanity's first serious attempt at solving practical problems through engineering and innovation. Unfortunately, those solutions are primitive, unreliable, and often more dangerous than the problems they're trying to solve. Your tools are made from wood, stone, and limited amounts of metal. They break regularly, wear out quickly, and require constant maintenance that you have to perform yourself. A broken tool isn't just an inconvenience. It's an economic disaster that can affect your ability to work and earn food. Metallurgy exists, but metal tools are expensive and rare. Most of your implements are wooden handles attached to stone blades, points, or cutting edges. These work adequately for simple tasks, but become inadequate quickly when you need precision, durability, or strength. Transportation technology consists of human backs, animal power, and simple carts with wooden wheels. Moving anything heavy requires multiple people, extensive planning, and acceptance that the journey will be slow, difficult, and prone to break down. Construction techniques rely on mud bricks, stone blocks, and wooden supports held together by craftsmanship and hope. Buildings collapse regularly, roads require constant maintenance, and infrastructure fails catastrophically during earthquakes, floods, or simple neglect. Agricultural technology is limited to hand tools, animal-drawn plows, and irrigation systems that require constant manual maintenance. Farming is entirely dependent on human and animal labor, which means that agricultural productivity is limited by the number of available workers and the strength of available animals. Medical technology consists of herbal remedies, ritual purification, and surgical techniques that are more likely to kill patients than cure them. There are no anesthetics, no antibiotics, no understanding of sterile procedures, and no effective treatments for most diseases. Communication technology is limited to human messengers, signal fires, and written messages on clay tablets. Information travels slowly, gets distorted in transmission, and often arrives too late to be useful for decision-making. Timekeeping is approximate, and based on astronomical observations that require specialized knowledge. Coordinating activities across communities or planning complex projects is difficult when nobody agrees on what time it is, or what day of the month they're experiencing. Chapter 20: Family Life and Personal Relationships. Personal relationships in ancient Mesopotamia operate under social, economic, and religious pressures that make modern family dynamics seem simple and straightforward. Marriage isn't a romantic choice. It's an economic alliance between families designed to consolidate resources, establish social connections, and produce children who can support aging parents. Love might develop between spouses, but it's not required or expected. Arranged marriages are negotiated like business contracts, with dowries, bride prices, and detailed agreements about property rights, inheritance, and family obligations. Your opinion about your spouse is less important than your family's. Opinions about the economic arrangement. Children are economic assets and insurance. Policies rather than expressions of parental love and creativity. They represent future labor, potential income, and care for elderly parents. Child mortality rates are so high that families need multiple children to ensure that some survive to adulthood. Parenting involves preparing children for lives of hard labor and social subordination. Education is limited to practical skills needed for survival and economic productivity. Children learn to work as soon as they're physically capable, because families can't afford to support non-productive members. Women's roles are defined entirely by their relationships to men, as daughters, wives, or widows. They have few legal rights, limited economic opportunities, and social expectations that prioritize their reproductive function over their individual capabilities or preferences. Divorce is theoretically possible, but practically difficult, especially for women. Divorced women face economic hardship, social stigma, and limited options for remarriage or independent survival. Men can divorce wives relatively easily, but women need substantial grounds and social support to initiate divorce proceedings. Extended family relationships are crucial for survival. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins provide economic support, social connections, and assistance during crises. Family loyalty isn't just emotional bonding, it's practical necessity in a world without social safety nets. Inheritance laws favor male heirs and preserve family property within patriarchal lineages. Women inherit property only in specific circumstances, and their inheritance rights are limited by marriage and family obligations. Chapter 21. Entertainment and leisure. What little exists when you're not working, sleeping, or performing religious obligations. You have brief moments that might charitably be called leisure time. Unfortunately, entertainment options in ancient Mesopotamia are limited by resources, social restrictions, and the constant threat of accidentally committing blasphemy. Storytelling is the primary form of entertainment, with professional bards reciting epic tales of gods, heroes, and monsters. These aren't just stories, they're religious instruction, historical records, and moral guidance wrapped in narrative form. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't entertainment. It's a guide to proper human behavior and the relationship between mortals and gods. Music exists, but musical instruments are expensive and require skills that take years to develop. Most people make music with their voices, clapping hands, and simple percussion instruments made from whatever materials are available. Musical performance is often part of religious ceremony rather than secular. Entertainment. Dancing is primarily ritual activity rather than social recreation. Different dances have specific religious meanings and are performed during festivals, ceremonies, and community celebrations. Dancing for pure enjoyment exists, but is limited by social expectations and religious requirements. Games and sports exist in simple forms: wrestling, running, throwing contests, and board games played with dice and carved pieces. However, gambling is regulated by religious and social restrictions. and competitive activities can quickly escalate into disputes that have legal and social consequences. Drinking establishments serve beer and provide social gathering spaces, but they're also centers of potential trouble. Drunkenness can lead to accidents, fights, blasphemy, and various forms of social or legal problems. Even relaxation carries risks in ancient Mesopotamia. Seasonal festivals provide the closest thing to organized entertainment, with processions, theatrical performances, and community celebrations. However, these are primarily religious observances rather than entertainment events, and participation is mandatory rather than optional. Private entertainment is limited to family gatherings, informal socializing, and personal hobbies that don't require expensive materials or tools. Most leisure activities are practical skills that also serve economic or household functions, crafts that produce useful items, storytelling that preserves family history, or games that teach children adult skills. Chapter 22: Death, Burial, and the Afterlife. Death in ancient Mesopotamia isn't just a biological event. It's a complex social, religious, and economic process that affects entire communities and determines your eternal fate. Life expectancy is short enough that death is a constant presence in daily life. You'll watch children die from diseases that modern medicine treats icily. You'll see adults die from injuries that contemporary emergency medicine handles routinely. You'll witness elderly people, meaning anyone over 40, succumb to conditions that are treatable today. The dying process usually happens at home, surrounded by family members who provide what comfort they can with limited medical knowledge and resources. Pain management consists of herbal remedies that may or may not be effective, and spiritual comfort from family members and local priests. Preparation for death involves settling debts, transferring property, and performing religious rituals designed to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. The wealthy can afford elaborate preparation rituals, professional priests, and expensive burial arrangements. Common people make do with family-performed ceremonies and simple burial practices. The afterlife in Mesopotamian religion is not a pleasant prospect. The underworld is a dark, dusty realm where the dead exist as shadows of their former selves, sustained on offerings from living relatives. This isn't eternal reward or punishment, it's eternal boredom and hunger. Burial practices reflect social status and family resources. Nobles are buried with grave goods, elaborate coffins, and extensive ritual preparation. Common people are buried simply, with minimal ceremony and whatever small possessions the family can afford to give up. Proper burial is essential for the deceased's spiritual welfare and the family's social standing. Unburied bodies become angry, ghosts that torment the living. Improper burial rituals can curse entire families with supernatural harassment. Mourning periods involve specific behavioral requirements, types of clothing, restrictions on activities, and prescribed expressions of grief. These aren't just emotional responses. They're social obligations that demonstrate proper respect for the deceased and adherence to community standards. Inheritance disputes begin immediately after death and can destroy family relationships for generations. Property division, debt, responsibility, and care for surviving dependents create conflicts that the legal system resolves slowly and expensively. Memorial obligations continue long after burial. Families are expected to provide regular offerings to deceased relatives, maintain grave sites, and perform annual commemorative rituals. These obligations can impoverish surviving family members while ensuring the spiritual welfare of the dead. Chapter 23. Surviving your first year. Let's assume that somehow, through extraordinary luck, divine favor, or sheer stubborn persistence, you've managed to survive your first few months in ancient Mesopotamia. Congratulations, you've beaten odds that would make modern insurance actuaries weep. But survival isn't just about making it through the initial shock. It's about developing the skills, knowledge, and relationships necessary for long-term existence in this hostile environment. You've learned to recognize the signs of contaminated water by watching which sources make people sick and which sources seem relatively safe. You've developed a tolerance for food that would horrify modern food safety inspectors. Your digestive system has adapted to a diet that consists primarily of grain products and whatever protein sources you can scavenge or afford. Your social awareness has sharpened to the point where you can navigate complex hierarchies without accidentally insulting someone important. You've learned which gods require daily attention, which local officials expect regular deference, and which community members can be trusted with information or small favors. Physical adaptation has been brutal but effective. Your skin has developed protective layers against sun exposure. Your feet have toughened enough to handle rough surfaces without shoes. Your hands have developed calluses that allow you to work with primitive tools without constant injury. You've acquired basic skills in essential survival activities: finding or creating shelter, preserving food, treating minor injuries, and performing the types of labor that local communities require. These aren't advanced skills, but they're sufficient to keep you alive and economically viable. Most importantly, you've developed the psychological resilience necessary to function in a world where terrible things happen regularly and there's usually nothing you can do about them. You've learned to focus on immediate, practical concerns rather than abstract fears about the future. But survival comes with costs. Your health has been permanently affected by malnutrition, environmental hazards, and inadequate medical care. Your social status has stabilized at the bottom of the hierarchy, with little prospect for improvement. Your economic situation provides subsistence, but no security or comfort. Chapter 24. The bigger picture. As you've struggled to survive your personal nightmare in ancient Mesopotamia, it's worth stepping back to consider what you've been experiencing from a historical perspective. You've been living through humanity's first experiment with urban civilization. And like most experiments, it's been messy, dangerous, and full of unintended consequences. The city-states of Mesopotamia represent humanity's first attempt at organizing large populations into complex societies. The technology, social structures, and cultural institutions you've encountered are humanity's first drafts of civilization. They work, barely, but they're crude prototypes of systems that will be refined over thousands of years. The brutal inequality you've experienced isn't an accident or a moral failing. It's a structural feature of early civilization. Creating cities, supporting non-agricultural specialists, and maintaining complex institutions requires extracting surplus resources from agricultural workers. Someone has to produce more food than they consume, and that someone is people like you. The constant religious anxiety that defines daily life reflects humanity's first attempt at understanding and controlling natural forces that seem random and hostile. The gods aren't just supernatural beings. They're personifications of weather patterns, disease outbreaks, military conflicts, and economic forces that early civilizations couldn't understand or predict. The legal systems that seem arbitrary and harsh represent humanity's first attempts at maintaining order in communities. too large for personal relationships and informal social control. Written law codes, like Hammurabi's, are revolutionary innovations, even when they seem primitive and unfair by modern standards. The technological limitations that make daily life so difficult reflect the early stages of human innovation. Every tool you've used, every technique you've learned, and every system you've encountered represents solutions that previous generations developed through trial and error, often deadly error. Your personal suffering has been part of a larger historical process, the painful transition from small-scale hunter-gatherer societies to large-scale agricultural civilizations. This transition created the foundation for all subsequent human development, but it came at enormous personal cost for the people who lived through it. Chapter 25. Lessons from the Cradle of Civilization. What can modern people learn from your hypothetical ordeal in ancient Mesopotamia? The experience offers perspectives on human nature, social organization, and the relationship between technological progress and individual welfare that remain relevant thousands of years later. First, civilization isn't automatically beneficial for everyone who lives within it. The same innovations that create art, literature, and monumental architecture also create inequality, exploitation, and systematic oppression. Progress at the societal level doesn't necessarily mean improvement in individual lives. Second, human beings are remarkably adaptable to difficult circumstances. The conditions you've experienced would seem unbearable to modern people, but millions of ancient Mesopotamians lived entire lives under these conditions and created families, communities, and cultures that lasted for millennia. Third, technological solutions often create new problems while solving old ones. Irrigation systems enable agriculture but require constant maintenance and create vulnerability to warfare. Writing enables record-keeping but also enables taxation and legal control. Cities enable specialization but also enable inequality and exploitation. Fourth, social institutions that seem natural and inevitable are actually human creations that serve specific purposes and can be changed. The religious systems, legal codes, and economic arrangements you've encountered weren't handed down by gods. They were developed by human beings to solve practical problems, and they can be replaced by different human solutions. Fifth, individual powerlessness in the face of large social forces is a recurring theme throughout human history. The feeling of being trapped by systems you didn't create and can't control isn't unique to ancient Mesopotamia. It's a common human experience across cultures and time periods. Finally, survival and flourishing require different skills and different social arrangements. The qualities that help individuals survive in hostile environments, adaptability, endurance, acceptance of hardship, aren't necessarily the same qualities that create just, prosperous, or fulfilling societies. And so we reach the end of your imaginary ordeal in the cradle of civilization. As the sun rises once again over the mud-brick walls and reed-thatched roofs of ancient Mesopotamia, casting long shadows across the dusty streets where you've learned to navigate between survival and catastrophe, it's time to return to your own era with new appreciation for indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and the radical concept that ordinary people deserve: legal protection. You've experienced firsthand why historians call this period both the dawn of civilization and one of the most difficult times to be alive in human history. You've learned that progress is messy, that innovation comes at enormous human cost, and that the foundations of everything we consider civilized were built on the backs of people whose names history never recorded. The next time you complain about traffic, difficult working conditions, or political problems, remember your time in ancient Mesopotamia. Remember the taste of chunky beer drunk through red straws, the feeling of sand in every piece of clothing you own, and the constant background fear that you might accidentally offend a god whose name you don't even know. But also remember that the human beings who endured these conditions weren't different from you in any fundamental way. They had the same capacity for love, creativity, humor, and hope that defines humanity in every era. They created the first cities, the first laws, the first literature, and the first technologies that would eventually lead to the world you actually inhabit. Their suffering wasn't meaningless, and their achievements weren't accidents. They were human beings doing their best with the tools and knowledge available to them, creating the foundation for everything that came after. As you drift back to your own time, with its antibiotics and air conditioning, its human rights and social safety nets, its educational opportunities and economic mobility, remember that none of these benefits appeared they're all products of thousands of years of human struggle, innovation, and gradual improvement on the foundations laid by people like the ancient Mesopotamians you've temporarily joined. The cradle of civilization rocked roughly, but it gave birth to everything that makes modern life possible. The people who lived through its emergence deserve our respect, our understanding, and our gratitude, even as we're profoundly thankful that we don't have to live their lives. Sweet dreams, modern humans. May your water be clean, your food be safe, and your gods be metaphorical. And may you never, ever have to find out whether you could actually survive a single day in the place where it all began. Good night.